History rarely moves quietly when it turns a new corner. In a time when Africa is still struggling to shake off the shadows of colonial rule, a fire suddenly broke out from Burkina Faso. According to multiple sources, at around 5:42 a.m. local time on August 11th in Yatenga Province in northern Burkina Faso, the peaceful morning sky was shaken by the roar of jet engines. Within seconds, a precision-guided strike tore through a military outpost, killing 2 soldiers and 1 civilian. 10 others were seriously injured and remain in critical condition. Immediately, the media erupted with reports of what many believe was a U.S. airstrike on Burkina soil. There were no warnings, no prior alerts, no authorization from the Burkina government, and no apology. Pentagon spokesman denied nothing. They didn't confirm it either. They simply repeated the same tired phrase, part of a counterterrorism campaign. But to the people on the ground, it felt like something else entirely. A violation, a betrayal. The airstrike carries the aching aftertaste of memory, the echo of foreign boots on African soil, and the heavy burden of borders drawn by hands that never belonged to the continent. Traoré and the heart of West Africa are walking on a fragile tightrope. And then amid the silence, one voice rose. "I came not to remove my own mask, but to rip off yours." Captain Ibrahim Traoré had spoken. The question now turns to Washington. How will White House leader Donald Trump and his allies respond to Traoré's defiance? Is this the awakening the continent has long awaited, or just another cruel cycle of history repeating itself? We're not here to spread rumors or stir up outrage. We're here to uncover what happened, why it matters, and how this moment could redefine Africa's role and the role of leaders like Ibrahim Traoré on the world stage. Stay with us, because this is not the story of one person or of one nation. It is the story of an entire continent reclaiming its voice. Subscribe and raise your voice for an Africa that stands tall, not silent. Drop your city. Share it loud. Let them know we will not be quiet. May God bless Traoré, protect Africa, and bring true peace to the world. If you believe this, say Amen in the comments. Sunrise in northern Burkina Faso was supposed to be a quiet morning. Farmers getting ready for the fields, soldiers switching shifts at the border outposts, and families just waking up to the first call of morning prayer. Overhead, the early light painted soft gold on the Sahel. The earth quaked. The heavens roared, and in a heartbeat, all tranquility was blown apart. But then the ground shook, the sky ripped open, and within seconds, thick black smoke rose into the Sahel sky. It all happened fast, just 2 guided missiles. 2 missiles, silent until they struck, fell from the sky and ripped through the military outpost near Ouanobia in Yatenga Province. The explosion shattered walls, snapped antenna towers, and left a smoking crater where a communication relay once stood. But it wasn't just concrete and stone that fell that day. The dead included 2 soldiers and 1 civilian, a mother passing nearby on her way to the market. Her name was Aminata. She was 37 years old, left behind 2 daughters. Within minutes, confusion spread. Phones stopped working. Radios cut to static. People screamed for their children. Men sprinted from market stalls. Rumors of more planes, of more bombs, spread faster than fire. No explanation, just smoke silence and the wailing of those left behind. By mid-morning, paramedics and soldiers arrived. But by then, the message had already traveled. This wasn't a rebel attack. It wasn't extremists. It was high-altitude precision-guided and far too advanced for anything local. But the rumors spread even faster than the blast itself. By 11 a.m., journalists began whispering the words that would soon ignite the continent U.S. Airstrike. No cameras were there to catch it. No foreign reporters were on the ground. According to leaked intelligence, the launch originated from a U.S. AFRICOM base in Niger, more than 600 kilometers away. The missiles flew unannounced without Burkina permission or coordination. The attack did not follow any joint operation, nor did it respond to any active threat. It was by all accounts unilateral, and by international law illegal. Under Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, No nation may use force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another member state. Yet that's exactly what happened. No warning, no consent, just force dropped from above. By noon, fear turned to fury. Shopkeepers slammed their shutters. Women pulled their children from schools. At the tea stalls, old men shook their heads and muttered, "This is how it begins again." Young men clenched their fists, remembering stories their grandfathers told of French paratroopers marching down Ouagadougou's streets, of resources taken, of voices silenced. Now, once again, foreign jets were dictating life and death in Burkina Faso. And yet the official statements from Washington were vague at best. Washington stayed silent. The White House refused to answer questions about the airstrike. In press briefings, the Pentagon talked only about Somalia, another operation won with clear evidence. In February 2025, AFRICOM had launched a confirmed strike against ISIS fighters there. But the African diaspora didn't need to be nearby to feel anger and suspicion. Why should the skies over the Sahel belong to anyone but Africans? If AFRICOM has operated freely in Niger for years, if drones can cross borders unnoticed, how can villages in Yatenga ever feel safe? To the people of Burkina Faso and across Africa, it felt like déjà vu. A reminder that in the eyes of global powers, African skies remain open airspace, a place where sovereignty is a suggestion, not a right. The latest news from Burkina Faso wasn't just about right or wrong anymore. It was about identity. Does this land truly belong to its people, or is it merely on loan from distant capitals? By evening, the story had traveled far beyond Yatenga. In Bamako, Dakar, Abidjan news anchors repeated the timeline. Bloggers posted satellite maps. Activists began sharing the phrase that would soon become a chant: our land, our right, our future. That day, Burkina Faso latest news didn't just mean headlines. It meant heartbreak. It meant defiance. It meant a question every African leader would have to face. If they can strike one of us today, who's next tomorrow? May God bless the souls of the innocent who have fallen. May He protect Traoré, guard Africa, and bring justice to the Sahel. Family type God bless Africa if you believe Africa's skies must belong to Africa. History only made the weight heavier. The French once called this place Upper Volta, drawing borders without ever asking the people. Independence came in 1960, but real freedom didn't follow. Coups and foreign-backed governments made sure sovereignty was always conditional. Every generation was taught accept outside presence in exchange for the promise of security. But that promise always breaks, and the cost is always paid by ordinary people whose names never make the headlines. In a world where media is controlled and history is written by the victors, one man stepped forward, not for applause, but to speak a truth everyone knows, yet few dare to say. When the name Ibrahim Traoré came up, the mood changed. In his familiar military uniform, he stood before 8 million citizens and made it clear, "I came not to remove my own mask, but to rip off yours." There was silence after that. No cameras clicked. No keyboards tapped. Those used to fancy polished speeches had nothing to say. Traoré looked straight into the camera eyes, burning with anger, like he was speaking directly to the White House. This attack was not just against the land of Burkina Faso. It was against the dignity and the right of a nation that dares to stand on its own feet as a free and independent people. While foreign analysts argued over whether the airstrike was a technical mishap or a necessary operation, President Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto live national television, no script, no teleprompter, only the fire in his eyes. He stood at the heart of Ouagadougou, flanked by senior officers, his familiar camouflage uniform stretched over a young but unyielding frame. Behind him, the national flag, its edges frayed with age, yet its colors, still defiant, fluttered against the weight of history. In a world where the media is controlled and history is written by the victors, one man stepped onto the podium not to chase political applause, but to awaken a truth everyone knew, yet no one dared to speak. And so when the name Ibrahim Traoré was called, the atmosphere shifted. Traoré walked to the podium and spoke before 8 million citizens. I came not to remove my own mask, but to rip off yours. There was silence after that. No cameras clicked. No keyboards tapped. Those used to fancy polished speeches had nothing to say. Traoré looked straight into the camera eyes burning with anger, like he was speaking directly to the White House. This attack was not just against the land of Burkina Faso, it was against the dignity and the right of a nation that dares to stand on its own feet as a free and independent people. He didn't mention the U.S. by name. He didn't need to. His message was clear. This time Africa would not respond with letters of protest or polite diplomacy. This time it would rise. He was the youngest leader in the room, but his words carried the weight of a seasoned statesman. Sovereignty is not a gift. It belongs to those who are willing to defend it. His words echoed far beyond Burkina Faso, not just in Addis Ababa, but in black communities in Harlem and Brixton, where activists saw in him a reflection of struggles still unfinished. As the dust began to settle in Yatenga, the streets of Ouagadougou were already coming alive. Across the capital, the mood transformed. The fear of that morning became something else, older, deeper, more powerful. A memory, a rhythm. By dusk, the crowd at Revolution Square had begun to grow. What started as a few hundred became thousands, men in work boots, women in market cloth, elders with walking sticks, youth with bandanas and clenched fists. They carried flags, photos of loved ones lost in past conflicts, and banners written in black paint, "Our land, our right, our future." At first, just a few dozen voices shouted it. Within an hour, thousands joined in. By nightfall, the sound was so powerful, people standing on balconies said they could feel it thumping in their chests. Radio hosts interrupted regular programming. WhatsApp groups lit up with calls to gather. Taxi drivers honked in unison. Drums echoed from alleyways, and within hours, over 35,000 people had packed Revolution Square. This was no spontaneous crowd. It was a people who had waited decades to scream back. The air was electric, thick with memory and momentum. Women raised their voices in high-pitched ululations. Elders stood proudly, hands over their hearts. Children sat on shoulders, eyes wide with wonder. The words spoken by President Ibrahim Traoré that morning became the anthem of the square. Radio stations replayed his defiant declaration again and again, and each time his voice echoed through the loudspeakers, the crowd roared back in unison. He was no longer just a military man or a president. He was becoming something more. In every corner of the square, voices remembered the name Sankara Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary son of Burkina Faso, who once dared to dream of an Africa free from dependency, debt, and domination. His ghost now marched again in chants, posters, and memory, and in Traoré they saw a man unafraid to pick up the torch. His speech shifted the winds. The world started paying attention to Africa. New debates and questions began. Who controls African skies? Who decides its security? Who shapes its future? Traoré didn't stop at words. He took action. The next morning, his orders were swift. He ordered immediate military reinforcements. All 12,000 standing troops were placed on high alert. Along the borders with Mali and Niger, 200 additional soldiers were deployed to strengthen defenses. At key sites like the Ouagadougou Air Base and the Koudougou Barracks, combat readiness was raised to DEFCON 2. It was a clear signal this country was not just mourning. It was preparing to defend itself. Global observers expected panic or paralysis. What they saw instead was resolve. By nightfall, the story had swept across the continent. A small country had been struck, but its people stood taller, not lower. Do you believe sovereignty is negotiable, or is it sacred? If today they can strike Burkina Faso without consent, then what country will be safe tomorrow? No more waiting, no more hoping for outside respect. Burkina Faso would protect itself because no one else would. And as these actions rippled through the country, the people responded not with fear, but with pride. A grandmother at the protest held up a weathered photo of her son, a soldier lost years ago to extremist gunfire. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "They told us we were too small to stand. But today my son stands again." Through this leader, the media called it a political shift. The streets called it something else, resurrection. Songs of defiance, some dating back to colonial resistance, rang out in unison. The message was clear: Burkina Faso would not bow. If anything, the attack had awakened something stronger than fear, a unity forged in pain and memory. The world was stunned. Whether or not the airstrike was ever confirmed no longer mattered. Those missiles were supposed to silence the people, but instead they gave them a voice louder than any explosion. That night in Revolution Square, a nation was reborn, not in fear, but in defiance. And across the continent, millions were listening. Has the time come for Africa to enter a new era? Or is this just another dark chapter in a long book of oppression? That answer isn't just up to them. It's up to you. What does sovereignty mean to you? To the farmer in Georgia listening tonight. To the grandmother in Chicago who still remembers the day Mandela walked free. To the student in Detroit, hungry for stories of heroes who crossed oceans. The question isn't whether Africa will rise. The question is, will you rise with her? 18 hours after the first missile struck, Yatenga phones began ringing inside the marble halls of the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. Within hours, an emergency session was called the fastest in AU history. 42 African foreign ministers attended, some in person, others via secure satellite link. President Ibrahim Traoré appeared live on screen. His face broadcast on the massive screen was youthful but firm. He spoke slowly, each syllable echoing through the hall. Burkina Faso will not stand alone. And I believe you won't either. The room erupted in applause. For the first time in years, a leader had said out loud what many had only whispered. The African Union looked less like a committee and more like a chorus. Outside those walls, something even more powerful was happening. In Bamako, more than 50,000 marched through Independence Avenue, waving both the Malian and Burkinabe flags. The crowd sang freedom songs, beat drums, and held signs that read, "When one is wounded, we all are." In Conakry, Guinea, a candlelight vigil was held in front of the Burkina Faso embassy to honor the 3 who lost their lives. Even in Nairobi, a city known for close ties to Washington's, small but passionate protests took place calling for African unity. Radio shows captured the pulse of the people. From Lagos to Dar es Salaam, callers flooded the airwaves urging their governments to take a stand. Some recalled memories of anti-colonial struggle, warning that history was repeating itself. One caller asked bluntly, "If they bomb Burkina Faso today, what's stopping them from bombing us tomorrow?" The pressure from the people quickly turned into political momentum. Governments that had chosen silence were now forced to speak up. Statements of condemnation rolled in, some bold, others cautious, but all agreed this had gone too far to ignore. Even nations once seen as close to Washington now called on the U.S. to respect Africa's sovereignty. But this wave of response didn't stop at outrage. It turned swiftly into real action. One Nigerian defense analyst said it plainly, "Unity is no longer a slogan. It's a condition for survival." Social media became a battlefield of truth and solidarity. Hashtags like Africa Unites and Our Future, Our Fight surged across the continent. Videos of the protest in Revolution Square spread like wildfire, often paired with clips of Traoré's powerful speech. The images were striking: a young leader standing firm, his people behind him, and a continent beginning to echo his call. Even the African diaspora in Europe and America joined in. In Paris, London, and New York, Pan-African groups organized protests on their own without waiting for approval. No one needed to remind them that this fight was no longer about geography. People marched along the River Seine, chanting "Africa Rising" and "Long Live Ibrahim Traoré," waving the flags of Burkina Faso and the African Union side by side. Their message was clear: Africa's struggle is global, and its children overseas will not stay silent. To them, this wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about all those across the world who have been pushed to the margins because of the color of their skin. Under every video post or shared image from back home, thousands of comments poured in. Africa is waking up. We stand with you from the diaspora. Africa rising, not a slogan, a reality. And what about you? Leave a thank you for those still fighting. Leave a word of hope for a future that is being rewritten before our eyes. Africa is not just rising. Africa is moving forward. At the United Nations in New York, tensions rose fast. The ambassador from Burkina Faso called for an emergency session of the Security Council. The debate lasted 3 hours and quickly turned heated. Washington scrambled to contain the fallout. Think tanks in Brussels and Washington began asking serious questions. Did the U.S. miscalculate? Was a strike meant to show strength instead, exposing a deeper weakness? A failure to grasp just how vital sovereignty is to the African people. Behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, concern was spreading. Members of the Senate Armed Services Committee demanded a clear explanation. Senator Mark Rutledge of Illinois warned, "If we carry out military strikes on sovereign territory without consent, we are entering dangerous territory, not just morally, but strategically." His words reflected rare bipartisan discomfort. The United States, long a voice for national sovereignty, now stood accused of violating it on African soil. Russia and China publicly condemned the strike, calling it a modern act of colonial aggression. France, once the dominant power in West Africa, took a cautious route, urging restraint, but avoiding any direct criticism of Washington. To many Africans, it was another sign that Paris was playing both sides, unwilling to risk losing influence. Germany and Italy expressed concern. Berlin warned there can be no partnership without trust. The United Kingdom issued a measured statement calling for dialogue. The world was divided, but this time Africa's voice wasn't drowned out. The global media showed the fractures even more clearly. Western networks like CNN and Fox News focused on the threat of extremist groups in the Sahel, framing the attack as a necessary preemptive strike. African media told a very different story. Their focus was clear sovereignty. Africa News aired President Ibrahim Traoré's full speech on loop. Public anger across the continent intensified. Analysts accused Western media of downplaying the sovereignty issue, burying it under counterterrorism language. On social media, Africans called it what it was. Security without consent is just control with a new name. The latest news about Burkina Faso was no longer just about Burkina Faso. Talk shows in Lagos and Kampala debated whether this moment marked the first page of a new African chapter. "Tonight we are all," Burkinabe said one Ghanaian journalist on live television, his voice trembling as the studio erupted in applause. In Niger, when an unauthorized drone strike killed civilians, Traoré stood shoulder to shoulder with Niger's interim leader. Together they declared the era of unilateral foreign attacks in Africa is over. Images of the two young leaders side by side before the cameras aired live across the continent. It became a rare and powerful symbol, African nations united in the face of outside force. And at the center of it all, Ibrahim Traoré had become a symbol not just of resistance, but of a new possibility. Through swift action, Traoré calmed the fear and strengthened the message. Dependency is not destiny. President Ibrahim Traoré understood that this wasn't just a military incident. It was a test of leadership. He could choose isolation, or he could turn a wound into an opportunity for unity. He chose the second path. In the days following the attack, Ouagadougou changed completely. Military checkpoints appeared across main roads. Soldiers patrolled government buildings, the airport, and media centers. The capital looked like a fortress. But beneath the uniforms and weapons, something deeper was unfolding, a shift that could change the balance of power across all of Africa. The night air in Bamako was thick with secrecy and purpose. Behind closed doors, inside a heavily guarded government building, delegations from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso met at a long wooden table. Maps of the Sahel lay stretched out before them, covered in red pins marking threats and blue lines marking borders. For years, they were told their security depended on foreign troops and foreign bases. But now, with one voice, they declared the opposite. For the first time in decades, building a joint African defense force was seriously on the table. Analysts called it the Sahel Shield, a rapid response unit capable of countering any military threat without relying on outside powers. They signed a treaty. Any act of aggression against one would be treated as an attack on all three and responded to as one. The idea wasn't new, but the urgency had never been clearer. Western capitals didn't hide their discomfort. French newspapers called it a dangerous precedent. Think tanks in Washington warned that intelligence sharing could suffer. European diplomats whispered about a strategic vacuum that might be filled by Moscow or Beijing. But in the Sahel, those warnings fell flat. To ordinary people, this alliance wasn't about global politics. It was about African armies standing up for African skies. Inside Burkina Faso, the changes were just as bold. Traoré's government began reviewing foreign mining contracts, especially those involving gold and manganese. For too long, those resources had flowed outward, enriching corporations in Paris, London, and Washington, while villages stayed poor. Now new terms demanded that national interests come first. This wasn't just economic policy. It was a clear message. Sovereignty isn't only above the ground. It's also below it. Not everyone believed. Foreign critics predicted economic collapse. They warned that cutting off aid would cripple the nation. Skeptics pointed to hardships, rising fuel prices, food shortages, tighter sanctions. How can three poor countries stand against global powers, they asked. But even in doubt, there was dignity. A Burkina farmer responded with an old proverb, "A small shield, if raised together, can block the sun." Traoré proved his point. His administration pivoted toward new partners in Africa and Asia, avoiding dependency traps. When fuel prices spiked by 12% in the days after the attack, emergency measures stabilized the market. Grain imports were secured through new agreements with Algeria and Egypt. Through swift action, Traoré calmed uncertainty and reinforced his message: dependency is not destiny. In Washington, the land of stars and stripes, the language of security is polished smooth and filled with abbreviations. Human rights, counterterrorism, stabilization, strategic partnership. Earlier this year, General Michael Langley, commander of U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, spoke before Congress. His words were confident and well-rehearsed. Our mission is to empower African partners, support them in building capacity to confront extremist threats, and ensure regional stability. To an American audience, those words sound reassuring. Terrorism is real. Bombs have left scars in markets from Mogadishu to Abuja. Gunmen have attacked schools, churches, and mosques. No African leader can deny that blood has been shed in the name of extremism. But in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, Langley's words rang differently. The Sahel's answer is clear. Yes, we fear terror, but we fear domination even more. Tensions reached a breaking point when African broadcasters began flipping the Pentagon's own language. One host asked live on air, "If America truly wants cooperation, why does cooperation sound like a command?" Analysts began to wonder if three of Africa's most vulnerable nations could commit to defending one another. Perhaps the African Union, AU, could one day extend that principle across the continent. A Nigerian general said it clearly on national radio. Today, it's the Sahel. Tomorrow, it could be Lagos. Either we act as one or fall one by one. In Burkina Faso, the alliance became a rallying cry. Posters of Traoré standing beside Colonel Goïta of Mali and General Tiani of Niger now line the streets of Ouagadougou. Traoré, not yet 40, stood between two older seasoned men. Yet his voice carried the weight of an entire generation. "If we bow today, our children will crawl tomorrow," he said. And the question still remains, can Africa hold this moment? Or will the weight of foreign influence, economic pressure, and political division wear it down? That's not a question one leader can answer. So I ask you, those standing with Africa, are you ready to carry this flame further? Are you ready to speak up when silence feels safer? To stand tall when it's easier to bow? If this story has reached you, don't let it pass by. Like, share, speak up, subscribe, because our history has been hidden for too long. It's time to raise our voices for the future. The headlines about Captain Ibrahim will change tomorrow. But one thing will remain: the dignity of Africa is not up for negotiation. Say it loud in the comments, Africa rise. God bless Africa and Burkina Faso. Don't let silence erase our voice. Tonight we are all Burkinabe. Every comment is a reminder that we're still here, that justice still stands, and it cannot be erased. Because Africa is not just catching up. We are building our own systems from the smallest acts on our own terms. Thank you for standing with us here. We'll see you in the next chapter. A chapter they wanted hidden, but we will never let that happen.